On October 23rd, 2025, something quietly historic happened that a woman who had once traveled across the stars, at least on television, passed away at the age of 100. Her name was June Lockhart. To millions, she was the heart of Lost in Space. But to those who worked beside her, she was something more. Someone who carried stories for decades, stories she rarely told. Until the very end. Because when you outlive almost everyone who shared those memories with you, something changes. The need to protect the past fades. The truth becomes lighter to carry. And sometimes it finally comes out. And what came out in those final years reshaped everything people thought they knew about Lost in Space. By 2025, only a handful of the original cast remained. Time had quietly taken a rest. Bill Mumy, once the boy genius Will Robinson, was now in his 70s. Angela Cartwright and Marta Kristen, his on-screen sisters, had grown older too, but something about them hadn't changed. They still showed up for each other. In fact, in March 2026, the three were photographed together, smiling like no time had passed at all. 60 years later, and they were still a family. That alone tells you something. Because what they went through together wasn't just a television show. It was something far more complicated, filled with ambition, rivalry, quiet suffering, and decisions that would change lives forever. And some of those decisions were never supposed to be public. When Lost in Space ended, it didn't end with applause. There was no final bow, no emotional farewell. It ended with silence. June Lockhart didn't get a call. No producer sat her down. No network executive thanked her for years of work. She found out the show was canceled by reading a small notice in her morning newspaper. That was it. Imagine dedicating years of your life to something watched by millions, only to learn it's over like that. Bill Mumy was just 14 when he got the news. He had spent his entire childhood on that set, and when his agent told him it was over, he went home and cried. Not because the show ended, but because no one had told him it was going to. They all believed there would be another season. They filmed the last episode thinking they'd be back in a few weeks. They never were. Originally, Lost in Space wasn't meant to revolve around chaos, comedy, or even conflict within the crew. And one character in particular was never meant to last. Dr. Zachary Smith. In the original plan, he was a villain. Cold, dangerous, disposable. He was supposed to be gone within a handful of episodes. But Jonathan Harris had other ideas. He looked at the character and saw something most people didn't, an opportunity not just to survive on the show, but to dominate it. So he started rewriting things. Quietly at first, he would arrive on set with pages of new dialogue. Entire scenes reshaped overnight. Lines rewritten to redirect attention toward himself. And it worked. Slowly, Dr. Smith changed. He became less of a threat and more of something else entirely, cowardly, dramatic, unpredictable, and strangely hilarious. Those iconic insults? Completely invented by Harris. Bubble-headed booby. Blithering idiot. Bellicose bumpkin. None of it was in the script. He created it all. And audiences loved it. Fan letters poured in hundreds every month. Suddenly, the character who was supposed to disappear became the one people couldn't get enough of. The show adapted. It had to. But that shift came at a cost. Guy Williams was supposed to be the hero. He was already a star, known for playing Zorro. He had the look, the presence, the confidence. Lost in Space was meant to be his next big chapter. At first, it was, but as Dr. Smith grew in popularity, something else started happening, quietly, almost invisibly. Williams' screen time began to shrink. Season by season, episode by episode, the focus shifted. Stories revolved more around Smith and less around the Robinson family's leader. Until eventually, the man who was meant to lead the show was barely part of it. He would show up, deliver a few lines, and step aside while others carried the story forward. For an actor, there are few things harder than watching your role fade away, especially when it was supposed to define your career. The tension on set grew. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse than that. It was quiet. After the show ended, Williams' career never truly recovered. The industry moved on. Opportunities faded. But in a strange twist, halfway across the world, he found something he hadn't expected. In Argentina, he wasn't forgotten. He was celebrated. Zorro had become a cultural phenomenon there, and Williams was treated like royalty. For years, he lived a life of admiration and recognition that Hollywood had quietly taken from him. But his story didn't end the way anyone would have wanted. In 1989, he died alone in his apartment. It took days before anyone found him. The man who was supposed to lead a legendary series left the world in silence. To audiences, the robot was iconic. It was expressive, memorable, almost alive. But inside that suit was a man named Bob May, and what he endured was something few people ever knew. The suit weighed around 200 pounds. Under hot studio lights, it became unbearable. The air inside was limited, movement was difficult, and on more than one occasion, Bob May passed out while wearing it. Not from exhaustion, from lack of oxygen. Production didn't stop. There was always another scene to shoot, another episode to finish. May continued working day after day, despite injuries, heat, and conditions that would be considered unacceptable by today's standards. And when the show aired, he wasn't credited, not once, for all the physical work, for all the performance that made the robot unforgettable. His name never appeared on screen. Years later, while the show continued generating money and recognition, May and his wife were living modestly, far from the spotlight he had helped create. Yet despite everything, those who met him later in life described him as generous, kind, endlessly patient with fans. He never made anyone feel invisible, even though for years he had been. Before Lost in Space became what audiences remember, it was something completely different. The original pilot was serious, thoughtful, almost cinematic. There was no robot, no Dr. Smith, no exaggerated humor. It was a story about survival, a family stranded on a distant world, relying on intelligence and cooperation to stay alive. It was ambitious, and it was expensive. When the network saw it, they liked it, but they didn't think it would work as it was. So they made changes. They wanted conflict. They wanted a recurring antagonist. They wanted something that could keep audiences coming back every week. And just like that, the tone of the entire series shifted. The version that could have been was locked away, replaced by something more marketable, and in many ways more memorable. While Lost in Space was airing, another science fiction show was struggling to survive. Star Trek. Today, it's considered legendary, but at the time, it lagged behind in ratings. The rivalry between the two shows wasn't as dramatic as people imagine. In fact, behind the scenes, there was cooperation. At one point, Lost in Space even borrowed costume pieces from Star Trek, including Spock's iconic ears. Fans noticed. Accusations followed. But the truth was simple. The people making both shows were just trying to get through tight deadlines and limited budgets. Sometimes that meant helping each other, and sometimes it meant strange overlaps. Like Bill Mumy, who spent his days filming Lost in Space and his nights watching Star Trek as a fan. Amid all the chaos, something unexpected happened on set. Bill Mumy and Angela Cartwright grew up together. They worked side by side, learned together, spent their formative years in the same environment. And eventually they fell in love. Young, genuine, and real. They were even engaged for a time. But life had other plans. They went their separate ways romantically, but something rare remained. Their friendship. For over 50 years they stayed close, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely cared about each other. In an industry known for temporary connections, theirs lasted a lifetime. One of the most surprising truths about Lost in Space is how it ended. Or, rather, how it didn't. There was no finale. No resolution. The Robinson family never made it home. The story simply stopped. The reason was surprisingly simple and frustrating. The network offered another season with a reduced budget. The producer refused. And just like that, it was over. Not because audiences lost interest, but because of a disagreement over money. Over the decades, the cast moved on. Some found new careers. Some struggled. Some were remembered, others forgotten, but the bond they shared never completely disappeared. Even now, the remaining cast members still come together. They still tell stories. They still laugh about moments that happened over half a century ago, because for all its complications, for all its behind-the-scenes struggles, Lost in Space gave them something real. For years, audiences saw a simple adventure series, a family, a spaceship, strange planets, and even stranger creatures. But behind that surface was something deeper. A story about ambition, about control, about people trying to hold onto something meaningful in an industry that rarely allows it. And maybe that's why it still matters. Not because of the special effects, not because of the stories, but because of the people. The ones who lived it, the ones who carried it, and the ones who are still here telling the story